At 1923, on the evening of Monday, May 5, 1980, the ITN duty editor in the newsroom heard his outside broadcast director shouting down the line from a scanner positioned at the rear of a Georgian terrace house in South Kensington. "Put me to air! Put me to air! This is incredible!" The transmission controller at Thames Television replied that Coronation Street was just ending. "We'll come straight to you." ITV went live first. 6 minutes later, BBC controllers simultaneously halted a John Wayne film on BBC One and the World Snooker Championship final on BBC Two. Cliff Thorburn was leading Alex Higgins 17-16 in the deciding frames at the Crucible, and cut both networks to the same address. Number 16, Prince's Gate, the Iranian Embassy, London. The building was on fire. 2 men in black coveralls were rappelling down the rear wall on caving ropes. A third was kicking through a first-floor window. A flashbang detonated. Smoke poured from the front facade. Inside, 6 gunmen of the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan have been holding hostages for almost 6 days. They had killed one of them. They had thrown one of the bodies onto the pavement outside. They had given the British government an ultimatum that expired at sunset. The British government's response, broadcast live, took 17 minutes. By 1940, 5 of the 6 gunmen were dead. 1 had been captured. 19 of the 22 remaining hostages were on the rear lawn, breathing, terrified, alive. The unit that had carried out the assault, 22 Special Air Service Regiment, B Squadron, Pagoda Troop, wouldn't be named publicly for 15 years. Most British people, on the morning of 30th of April 1980, had never heard of it. By dawn on 6th May, every newspaper in the English-speaking world had it on the front page. The American papers, in particular, had a specific reason to pay attention. 11 days earlier, American forces had attempted to rescue 52 American hostages from the embassy in Tehran. That attempt had ended in 8 dead servicemen, multiple wrecked aircraft, and not a single hostage freed. Operation Eagle Claw and Operation Nimrod had been authorized in the same fortnight by the same kind of political pressure against the same kind of crisis. One ended in the Iranian desert before it began. The other ended in 17 minutes on live British television. This is the story of how that happened. At approximately 11:30 on the morning of 30 April 1980, 6 armed men walked up to 16 Prince's Gate, carrying weapons concealed in lightweight holdalls. They were members of the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan, the DRFLA, an Iraqi-backed group seeking autonomy for Khuzestan, the oil-rich, Arab-populated province in southwestern Iran that Ayatollah Khomeini's new revolutionary government had no intention of partitioning. Their leader, Oan Ali Mohammed, known throughout the siege as Salim, overran Police Constable Trevor Locke of the Metropolitan Police's Diplomatic Protection Group, who was on guard outside the front door. Locke managed to transmit an emergency signal to Scotland Yard before he was seized. He didn't surrender his sidearm. 26 people were taken hostage initially, though some accounts cite 24, a discrepancy that likely reflects different counts of staff, visitors, and those caught inside at the moment of entry. Among them, Locke, Sim Harris, a BBC sound recordist who had come that morning to apply for a press visa. BBC TV news producer Chris Kramer. The embassy's chargé d'affaires, Dr. Gholam Ali Afrouz, and a range of Iranian diplomatic staff and visitors from at least 3 countries. Oan introduced his group as members of the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan, and issued 3 demands. the release of 91 Arab political prisoners held by Iran, a chartered aircraft to fly the gunmen and hostages out of Britain, and a public broadcast platform for their cause. A deadline of noon the following day was set. Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner John Dello took immediate control, establishing Alpha Control in a building nearby. The SAS were alerted within minutes, not through official channels, but because a former SAS corporal named Dusty Gray, then working as a Metropolitan Police dog handler, telephoned the regiment's operations room at Bradbury Lines in Hereford at 11:44 and reached Lieutenant Colonel Mike Rose directly. Rose mobilised without waiting for a formal Ministry of Defence order. By early the following morning, B Squadron, under Major Hector Gullen, had driven overnight to Regent's Park Barracks in London. The Cabinet Office briefing room, Cobra, stood up that afternoon. Margaret Thatcher, 9 months into her first term, monitored the situation hourly. Her position was fixed from the outset. Patient negotiation first, but if any hostage died, the SAS would go in. She ruled out allowing the gunmen to leave the country as free agents under any circumstances. Negotiations stretched across 6 days. The post office cut all telephone and telex lines into the embassy at police direction. MI5 engineers drilled through 48 centimetres of Victorian granite in the wall of the adjacent Ethiopian embassy and lowered listening devices down the chimneys, covering the noise with a fabricated gas main roadworks crew nearby. Each day, the gunmen's demands shifted incrementally. Arab ambassadors as mediators, then a coach to Heathrow, then a BBC broadcast. And each new demand was extended by negotiators buying time. On day 2, Kramer fell seriously ill and was released. His debrief gave police and SAS an internal picture of the gunmen's positions and weapons. On approximately day 3, a woman named Frida Mozaffarian was released in exchange for a broadcast of the group's demands. In total, approximately 5 hostages were freed through negotiation during the 6 days. 22 remained inside when the final hours began. Sim Harris emerged as the key internal intermediary, shouting demands from the first-floor window, relaying information between Oan and the negotiators outside. Locke, meanwhile, had not been properly searched when seized. For the entire 6 days, he concealed his loaded Walther PPK inside the embassy and said nothing about it. By day 6, the gunmen's morale had deteriorated under 6 days of non-progress. At approximately 13:45 on May 5th, Oan shot Abbas Lavasani, the embassy's chief press officer, inside the building. The British government had pre-decided that any hostage death would trigger the assault. At 18:02, Oan produced the body for the negotiators to see. At approximately 1900, Lavasani's body was thrown from the front door onto the pavement. At 1907, Dello formally handed operational control of the site to the Ministry of Defence. The police would continue talking by telephone to keep the gunmen occupied. The men now in charge weren't police. 11 days before that handover, on the night of April 24, 1980, a very different operation had attempted and failed. Operation Eagle Claw was the American attempt to rescue 52 US citizens held in the Tehran embassy since November 4, 1979. The plan required 8 RH-53D Sea Stallion helicopters, Navy aircraft piloted by Marine crews, to fly 600 miles from the carrier USS Nimitz across Iranian airspace to a clandestine refueling site in the Great Salt Desert, codenamed Desert One. There, 6 C-130 transport and tanker aircraft would link up with the helicopters, refuel them and stage the force for the actual rescue mission to Tehran the following night. It was an ad hoc organisation, assembled across 4 service branches: Army ground troops, Navy helicopters, Marine pilots, Air Force transports, coordinated under extreme operational security conditions that had limited the time for joint rehearsal. En route, the helicopters flew into a haboob, a violent dust storm the crews had not been warned about. 2 helicopters turned back before reaching Desert One, one with an indicator reading a cracked rotor blade, another with electrical failures caused by dust ingestion. 6 reached the staging area 50 to 90 minutes behind schedule. A third was found to have a malfunctioning hydraulic system on the ground. The mission planners had calculated a minimum of 6 fully operational helicopters to proceed. They had 5. The mission commander, following the preset abort threshold, called it off. During the withdrawal, an RH-53D Sea Stallion repositioning on the ground struck an EC-130 tanker aircraft. Both caught fire. 8 American servicemen died, 5 from the United States Air Force, Major Richard Backey, Major Harold Lewis Jr., Technical Sergeant Joel Mayo, Major Lynn McIntosh, and Captain Charles McMillan, and 3 U.S. Marines: Sergeant John Harvey, Corporal George Holmes Jr., and Staff Sergeant Dewey Johnson. President Carter addressed the nation on April 25th. "Late yesterday," he said, "I cancelled a carefully planned operation which was underway in Iran to position our rescue team for a later withdrawal of American hostages. Equipment failure in the rescue attempt left us short of our minimum requirements." A flag officer panel, chaired by Admiral James Holloway, was convened to review what had gone wrong. Its findings on command and control failures, inter-service operability, and equipment planning led directly to the formation of Joint Special Operations Command before the end of 1980. Eagle Claw was a mission of extraordinary difficulty, a 600-mile penetration of denied airspace into the heart of a hostile nation, requiring multi-night staging across hundreds of miles. It's operationally nothing like storming a known building in central London with 6 days of preparation and full state support. Delta Force, which led the ground element, had been operational for roughly 5 months at the time, having received its first tasking on November 4, 1979, the night the Tehran embassy fell. The operational comparison isn't clean, but precision isn't how the world reads headlines. On April 25, 1980, every English-language newspaper ran the story of American failure. On May 6, 1980, they ran something else entirely. B Squadron arrived at Regent's Park Barracks overnight on April 30th. By the afternoon of May 1st, police carpenters, assisted by the Pioneer Company of the Irish Guards, had built a scale model of the embassy at the barracks, paying specific attention to which direction internal doors opened and whether the lower floor windows had been fitted with armoured glass. The SAS had actually surveyed the building years earlier, when the previous Iranian government had asked them to assess its security. That survey gave them a baseline floor plan. 2 assault teams, Red Team and Blue Team, rotated on and off standby throughout the 6 days, one always resting while the other was at 10 minutes readiness. The SAS had held counter-terrorism responsibility since 1972, when the Munich Olympic massacre prompted Britain to establish a dedicated close-quarters battle capability within the regiment. The Counter-Revolutionary Warfare Wing, operating on rotating Pagoda Troop standby, trained specifically for scenarios involving a known building, a fixed number of armed occupants, and civilians to be extracted alive. Bradbury Lines, the Hereford facility wouldn't be renamed Stirling Lines until 1984, was built for precisely this. The scale model at Regent's Park wasn't improvisation. It was the standard method. By 1st May, Rose had also identified a concealed access route through the communal basement passage running beneath the terrace, which allowed assault teams to pre-position inside the adjacent building at number 14 Prince's Gate, undetected. The plan called for simultaneous entry at multiple points. Red Team would abseil from the roof to the rear of the building, blowing second-floor windows with explosive charges. Blue Team would breach a first-floor window at the front using plastic explosives. Stun grenades, flashbangs, would be deployed throughout. Speed, surprise, and disorientation were the operational foundation. Pre-assault estimates put the expected hostage casualty rate at 40%. On the command structure, most accounts confirm Lieutenant Colonel Mike Rose in overall operational authority, with Major Hector Gullen as the forward commander directing B Squadron on the ground. The precise division of responsibility at the moment of execution isn't settled with certainty across primary sources. Both names carry confirmed roles, and both appear throughout the record. The code word for launch was London Bridge. At 1907, Dello transferred control. At 1700 that afternoon, both assault teams had been in position with 10 minutes' notice. They had been waiting for 2.5 hours. London Bridge. The order went out at 19:23. Red Team's first group of 4 men began their abseil from the roof down the rear of the building. W01 Goodyear, leading the abseilers, became entangled in his rope near the second floor. Unable to detonate the window charges with a man trapped on the line, the team smashed their way in through the glass instead. A fire started. Stun grenades had ignited the curtains and spread rapidly up the rear facade. After Goodyear and 3 other soldiers entered the building through the broken window, the flames reached a trooper still descending on his rope behind the first wave. He caught fire. A second group of abseilers following behind cut him free. He fell to the balcony below and was brought inside. He survived with serious burns. Blue Team detonated plastic explosives against the armoured first-floor window at the front simultaneously. Much of what happened at the front of 16 Prince's Gate was visible from the street. Cameras had been positioned there for 6 days and broadcast live. Sim Harris, scrambling across the first-floor parapet on the orders of a masked trooper. His escape, watched by millions on television, became one of the most recognised images in the history of British broadcasting. Inside, the 15 male hostages had been consolidated in room 10 on the second floor, the telex room. When the assault began, the gunmen holding them opened fire on their captives. PhD student Ali Akbar Samadzadeh was killed. 2 others were seriously wounded. A police marksman outside the building, positioned with a line of sight through the telex room window, shot one of the gunmen in that room before he could kill more. Wan Ali Mohammed was on the first floor, talking with the police negotiators by telephone, when the noise of the breaking rear window reached him. He moved to investigate. PC Locke, who had spent 6 days waiting for this exact moment and had not surrendered his concealed Walther PPK, launched himself at Wan and wrestled him to the ground. Locke held him down, keeping his weapon hand immobilized, until a trooper shouted at him to roll clear. Locke did. Owen was shot dead. 2 of the remaining gunmen attempted to conceal themselves among the hostages as the SAS swept the building. Faisal, second in command, real name Shakir Abdullah Radil, produced a hand grenade while being escorted down the main staircase. A trooper, unable to fire without risk to the surrounding hostages, physically threw him to the bottom of the stairs, where 2 other soldiers shot him dead. The grenade rolled free. The safety pin had not been pulled. The 6th gunman, Fauzi Badavi Najad, 22 years old and the youngest of the group, attempted to blend into the crowd of released hostages in the rear garden. It was Sim Harris who identified him. 19 hostages emerged onto the rear lawn. 5 gunmen were dead. 1 was in custody. Scotland Yard officially declared the siege concluded at 2015. The assault had lasted 17 minutes. The ITN camera operator, David Goldsmith, had been operating a live linked unit secretly installed at the rear of the building. He was already shouting down the line before the first charge detonated. ITV carried the first live pictures. The BBC confirmed in its own internal television weekly programme reviews from a meeting held on the 7th of May came live approximately 6 minutes later, halting the John Wayne film and the snooker simultaneously. A BBC executive named Graham MacDonald, head of drama series, raised the discrepancy directly in that meeting. The controller of BBC Two acknowledged it without disputing it. The peak UK viewership figure most commonly cited, approximately 15 million, derives from BBC ratings data and reflects a peak, not an average. The 90 million global figure circulates widely in subsequent accounts as footage was distributed internationally. Primary documentation for the precise number is limited, but the scale of syndication was significant. Nothing like it had been broadcast before. A complete counter-terrorism assault from first charge to final hostage in real time. The gunmen had wanted a televised platform for their cause. They got one. Their demands were never met, their prisoners weren't released, and the Democratic Revolutionary Front for the Liberation of Arabistan is today unknown to the vast majority of people who watched that evening. Fauzi Badavi Najad was tried at the Old Bailey in 1981 and sentenced to life imprisonment. A 2003 Court of Appeal ruling opened the way for his deportation. He was released and deported to Iraq in 2008, having served 27 years. His was the only conviction arising from the assault, the only gunman to face a court, because he was the only one who survived. Thatcher visited the assault teams at Regent's Park Barracks that same evening. On 6th of May, she made a statement to the House of Commons, recorded in Hansard. Home Secretary William Whitelaw said publicly that he regretted force had been necessary, but that there had been no alternative. The embassy building itself, damaged extensively by fire, didn't reopen until 1993. A Westminster inquest returned a verdict of lawful killing on the 5 gunmen's deaths. The SAS had conducted the operation inside the law, inside the rules of engagement, and in conformity with the pre-established political authority that Thatcher had transferred at 1907. That legal framework, the formal handover from police to military at a specified point, with a cabinet-level authorisation chain, was itself a precedent. It established how Britain would do this if it ever had to do it again. Operation Nimrod wasn't the SAS's most complex operation, nor its most dangerous. The regiment had fought in Borneo, Oman and Northern Ireland, with less press coverage than one Monday evening in South Kensington generated. But what the operation permanently became is something more specific than a military success. A public proof of concept, broadcast live to an audience that had no idea the unit existed 48 hours earlier. Before May 5, 1980, the SAS had been, in the words of multiple subsequent accounts, at serious risk of disbandment. Its Second World War reputation had faded into classified history. Its Northern Ireland work was unknown to the public, and the regiment's peacetime institutional future was uncertain. Within 24 hours of the assault, all of that changed. Recruitment applications surged. The 2002 Channel 5 documentary, SAS Embassy Siege, the first time named participants spoke on camera, was watched by millions of viewers who already knew the operation's broad outlines from 2 decades of accumulated cultural reference. Tony Geraghty's Who Dares Wins, published in its comprehensive 1992 edition with the Nimrod chapter included, became a standard text. Andy McNabb's 1993 book, Bravo 20, an account of an SAS patrol in the Gulf War, sold in quantities that would have been unimaginable without Nimrod having established the brand. The visual grammar of men in black balaclavas descending on ropes appeared in Bond films, in video game franchises, in recruitment materials. Every time elite counter-terrorism was dramatized in popular culture after 1980, the reference point was Prince's Gate. In the United States, the journey back from Desert One was longer. Operation Just Cause in Panama in December 1989, in which Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 executed multiple simultaneous objectives successfully, began to restore American Special Forces' credibility in the public eye. The Bin Laden raid in May 2011, carried out by SEAL Team 6 under the designation Operation Neptune Spear, completed it. An operation that delivered a comparable result and became, in its own way, equally defining. The Holloway Commission's structural findings had in the meantime produced JSOC, Transformed Inter-Service Special Operations Coordination, and rebuilt the institutional architecture that Eagle Claw had exposed as inadequate. American Special Forces rebuilt a reputation that Desert One had damaged. They rebuilt it across 3 decades and several wars. The SAS built theirs in 17 minutes and never had to do it again. Pagoda Troop still exists. The rotation still turns. Lieutenant Colonel Rose commanded the regiment in the Falklands in 1982 and went on to lead the United Nations Protection Force in Bosnia in 1994. Several of the men who went down the rear wall of 16 Prince's Gate are now dead. The regiment itself moved from Hereford to a new facility at Creedon Hill around the turn of the millennium. The building changed. The standby didn't. Operation Nimrod lasted 17 minutes. It rescued 19 hostages alive. It killed 5 gunmen and captured a 6th. It was watched live by an ITV and BBC apparatus that had spent 6 days with cameras pointed at a building and was ready the moment it needed to be, by an estimated peak of 15 million British viewers, and by something close to 90 million people worldwide once the footage went global. It happened 11 days after the United States military lost 8 servicemen in the Iranian desert, attempting a far more ambitious mission on a vastly more difficult target. The British public, on the morning of 6th of May 1980, woke knowing the name of a unit that on the morning of 30th of April almost none of them had heard of. 46 years later, the unit still exists, the standby still rotates, and the men whose names weren't released that night are now mostly gone, and the operation remains the most watched, most cited, most imitated piece of Special Forces work in the modern history of the genre. The Iranian gunmen had wanted a televised platform for their cause. They got one. Their cause is forgotten. The unit that killed them isn't. And the precedent that on a Monday evening, on national television, an elected British government will send its soldiers down a Georgian terrace facade to recover its hostages in 17 minutes flat, has, since May 5, 1980, been the standard the rest of the world has measured itself against. The SAS didn't invent that standard on the night of Operation Nimrod. They demonstrated it. The world has been watching ever since. If you want more stories like this, subscribe.